Hello ladies and gents, welcome to another repair video. Today we're going to be taking a look at this PlayStation 4 Pro. This particular console has been sent in because it has a broken power supply 4-pin connector. And this is an issue that we commonly see when people attempt to clean out their console themselves. And when they disconnect the power supply, they pull too hard and they yank the connector from the board. So I thought I'd make a video on this. I've got a couple on the channel already, but I thought it was time for a refresher. And as you can see, we've got the power supply connector and the cable that goes from the power supply to the board in this little bag here. So these have been sent by the customer, and we're going to take a look. Hopefully there's not too much damage. We obviously can't test the machine because the connector's been ripped off, which means we've got no standby voltages, and this connector needs to be put back on for it to be able to recognise a button press. So let's take it apart, let's see what's happening with the board, and then we'll obviously repair whatever needs to be done, such as the traces, and hopefully get this connector back on to the board. While I've got your attention, if you're new to the channel, please remember to hit that subscribe button for more regular repair videos. Okay, so with the motherboard out then, if we take a closer look at this, we can clearly see that we've got some very visible damage around the power supply connector area. So this big connector here, the one with the long prongs on it, these go through to the power supply. So that provides 12 volt from the power supply to the motherboard. And then just here is meant to be a 5 volt connector. And this basically has the 5 volt connector, ground, and then the power supply detection lines. And the main use for this connector is to provide a constant 5 volts so that the PlayStation 4 knows when the power button has been pressed. Because if it doesn't have power, then it's never going to know when the power button's pressed, so it's not going to know to turn it on. So we need that 5 volt connector for that, amongst other things as well. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to restore the traces which have been torn off the motherboard. So those traces, we'll probably find them on the bottom of the connector itself. And we need to restore those traces, and we also need a way for the connector to be secured to the board. So we're going to need to restore something there and try and get it as secure as we possibly can. So let's go under the microscope, we'll see just how bad the damage is, and then we'll see what we can do about getting it fixed. Okay, so taking a look at that area there then, we can clearly see the visible damage. So we've got the 4 pins here, and these two here, these two parts which have been torn here is just ground, so that's absolutely fine. And also this one here is ground. So this bit here is ground as well. This is the main 5 volt input line just here, and then we've got a couple of other lines, a data line and an AC detect line. I'm not exactly sure 100% what those lines are off the top of my head, but we do need to restore those traces as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and scrape back some of this green coating here, so some of this conformal coating, and we're going to try and run some jumper wires from here to the bottom of where the pad was. And the reason for that is just so we can basically connect those jumper wires directly to the pins on the connector itself and restore the connection. We also need to scrape back some of this and basically try and sew a new pad onto it, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. So what I want to do then is I want to get rid of some of this conformal coating, so I'll start with these two big pads here, and I'm just going to scrape and expose the copper underneath the coating all the way around. So like I said, I need to basically sew a new pad onto the board, and it's not the easiest task, but it can be done. And the reason I need to sew a new pad onto the board is because I need somewhere for the connector to be soldered to stop it from being ripped off again, because if we just run the jumper wires to the connector, it's going to be loose and it's just going to pull off as soon as we try and connect anything up to it. The jumper wire itself isn't going to be very strong, so we need to do all we can to secure this port down in place and actually restore it properly, so as when the customer needs to clean it again in the future, it's going to be possible. With a little care, it will never be as strong as it once was, but that said, these connectors are not strong anyway, so it's just one of them things. Alright, so that's that one scraped back. So let's do the same for the other side. So just expose some of that, and then when we hit it with the soldering iron, it'll just pull the rest of that conformal coating off and allow us to solder to it. So those ones done. We'll just do that one a little bit more there. So now we need to do the same for these ones here. So now what I want to do is just clean it up really quickly, just to get rid of any foreign objects on the board. We don't want any debris on there while we're trying to solder, because that's potentially going to affect the connections. So I'll just use a bit of isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush and just give it a scrub. Get rid of all of that conformal coating that we scraped away, just the bits of dust that was left on the board. And now we're ready to start actually working with the traces. So let's just dry that off. And next what I want to do is just pre-tin all of these pads and traces. So I'll add some flux. So now I'm going to tin the pads and prep them for the jumper wires. So I'm going to use leaded solder. I'm not worried about a little bit of excess on the side. There we go. And now, like I said, we're going to run some jumper wires, but the first thing I want to do is sew some new pads onto these parts just here. And the way I'm going to do that is by basically wrapping a jumper wire around several times until it makes a new connection. So I'm going to use some jumper wire, and the jumper wire that I'll use for this particular repair is basically just motor wire out of an old microwave motor, and it does the job really nicely. So all I do is just take a scrap microwave and just pull the motor out of it, the side fan, and then just unravel the wire and put it onto a spool. So I'm going to pre-tin this just by running the soldering iron over it with a bit of solder around. And then I'm basically going to just solder to a few points on the pad itself. So you'll notice how I'll keep on wrapping around. And then eventually I can just break away the excess. Just trim that. And then we can do the other side as well. So you'll notice how I leave a little bit of an overhang on the jumper wire itself, and the reason for that is because I'm going to put some conformal coating over the top just to try and secure it a little bit better. Okay, so let's clean that up so we can actually see it. So I'm going to use some isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush again. And if the flux has started to harden, just give it a little bit of a warm up using hot air. And then we'll just use some isopropyl alcohol again. Just dry it off. And that part should be good to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some jumpers to the actual pins themselves now. So the 4 pins, which is the 5 volt, the ground, and then these 2 pins here. I'm going to run jumpers from these solder points here, which I've created, and then I'm going to run the jumper down, and I'm just going to leave a little bit of an overhang. So let's add some more flux. And then just trim the wire at the end and move on to the next one. Okay, so let me just clean that up and I'll see what it looks like. So again, that flux is going to be nice and dry, so let's just heat it up a little. Next, what we want to do is secure these jumper wires in place. So we're basically going to add some conformal coating around the edges just to secure the two ground traces, and that way then we can solder to them without them falling off. And we're also going to put some conformal coating on this side of the traces as well. And then once we've cured the conformal coating, we can drop the connector back on and just basically lift up the trace and solder the trace directly to the connector itself. So that's going to be the plan. Hopefully it works out for the best. So what I'll do is just take a bit of conformal coating out of the tube. We really don't need much at all. And I'm basically just going to paint the coating over the traces themselves and just try and secure it as best as I can. And we need to make sure that we've got no traces touching other traces. And that should be good enough. So what I'm going to do now is just separate the jumper wires here, the ones that I've accidentally put some coating on, because I don't want to secure those at the bottom. I'm going to need to be able to lift them up to be able to secure them to the pins. So I'm just going to keep them lifted while I use the UV laser. Okay, so I am going to use the UV laser now. I will skip through most of this, but just a little warning that this is a 405nm wavelength laser pen, and it will cause issues with epileptic people. So please look away now if you are suffering with epilepsy. I don't want to be responsible for any kind of an epileptic episode. So if you are epileptic, just look away for a few seconds and I'll let you know when it's safe to look again. So all I'm doing here is just holding the laser over the UV mask and just curing the mask itself to make it hard and secure it to the board. Okay, and that's more than good enough there, so that should be absolutely fine. So that's just going to protect the jumper wires from coming loose. So what I want to do now is clean up the connector itself, which is this thing here. And as you can see, the remainder of the traces from when it was ripped off are still there. So we need to get those off first. So I'm going to hold the connector with a pair of tweezers. Just add a little bit of flux there. And I'm just going to scrape the pins just to get rid of the old traces off them. There we go. So now that the connector is prepared, I can drop that into position. And what I want to do is I want to press down on the connector so as it's as flat to the board as I can get it. And then I want to add some solder to one of the ground legs just to be able to secure it into position. So I'll get it in position there. Let's add some flux. And then I'm going to put some solder onto the end of the tip, just to pre-apply it with some solder, because I've only really got one hand free. Now I'm going to press down from the top and just flow the solder again, and that's somewhat secured. Obviously we've got to do the other side as well. And you can see now that we've got a nice clump of solder on both sides of the connector, and that is nice and secure. So let's give that a clean, and then we'll take a look at it, and then we'll get the jumper wires soldered to the pins themselves. So a bit of isopropyl alcohol and a toothbrush, get into all of the edges and little gaps. And there we go. Now let's just give it a little dry. So now we need to position the jumper wires and get them ready for soldering them onto the pins themselves. So what I'll do with these is basically just wrap them around the pin, and that makes a nice solid connection then. And we might be slightly out of line here. I think we are. Yeah, we are slightly out of line, so I'm going to try and straighten that up. I need to basically push it a bit further to the left. And that's a little bit better, I think. So now let's get these soldered, shall we? So let's add some flux. So once the jumper wire is soldered to the pin, we need to break it away. But we've got to be careful here, because we don't want to end up yanking the jumper wire out of the wire that it's soldered to, or the trace that it's soldered to. So we do need to be careful. So that's that one done. Okay, so there's all four done now. So I can trim the remaining wire away. I should just be able to break it away. There we go. So I'm going to give this a scrub, and then we'll see what it looks like, and hopefully it does the job. Alright, that should be good to go. That did come away from that conformal coating, but that's fine. So because it come away from the conformal coating, I'll just trim it. Because I don't want that getting caught on one of the other pins. Right, so what I want to do now is I want to make sure that we've got no shorts to ground on any of the pins that are not meant to be shorted to ground. So the way I'm going to do that is by using the multimeter in continuity mode. So continuity mode is a mode that's going to beep when we complete the circuit. So if I pop, for example, one probe just here and another probe here, because there's a continuous path, the multimeter beeps and tells me that the probes are basically connected together. Same as here, that part there is ground. Same as here, that part there is ground, and this pin just here should be ground as well, and it is. The other pins should not be ground, so let's just make sure that we've got no short to ground on this one, and we don't. How about this one? We don't, and this one, no shorts to ground. So let's make sure we don't have a short between this pin and this pin, and we don't, so that should be good to go. So as you can see there, that should be good to go now. I know it doesn't look prettiest, but it should do the job. And as you can see here as well, I can tug on that connector there and it's not going to be lifting up anytime soon. So it's nice and secure. It means we don't have to use any kind of putty or epoxy or anything like that. And we should be good to go with this. So what I'll do is I'll just clean up the old thermal paste that's on the motherboard. It is fresh paste, but I'm going to clean it up anyway because I don't want to use old paste. It could be paste that's been sat there for months and just not been used. I'd rather just use fresh paste whenever I can. Unless it's me that applied the paste, of course. If it's me that applies the paste and I know when it went on and I know that it's only been, say for example, a day, then I'd probably reuse it, but in this case I'm not going to. Okay, and let's add some fresh MX4. Perfect. So let's pop the motherboard into the chassis now. Alright, so time to get the power connector in now then, so we can finish putting this back together. So I'm going to put it in from the motherboard side first, and as you can see, perfectly lined up there, so we should be good to go. Fingers crossed. So let's connect that up there. And then I'm going to plug it into the power supply, being very careful not to put any extra pressure onto the connector. Don't forget this is not factory anymore, so we don't know exactly how strong it is. All we know is that it's strong enough to hold it. And we'll get it screwed in. Just a little bit of something there. I'm not sure if it was there before, but let's give it a little bit of a wipe. There we go. And time for the moment of truth. What do you think? Is it going to work? I sure hope so. Let's get a HDMI cable. We can plug it in at the same time. And 3, 2, 1. And it turns on. So, nothing in the disk drive apparently. Let's flick over to the HDMI capture card. And there we go. Okay, that's brilliant. So that's booting into the dashboard. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to basically run through my normal tests, make sure everything works, and it should be good to go. But for the purpose of this video, this console is now repaired. So that's going to do it for this one. So just to summarise on this then, this console was originally sent in because it had a broken PSU connector, and loud fans, but that was already cleaned, so I didn't need to do anything with that one. But by running some trace wires to the corresponding pads on the motherboard and then by soldering them to the pins on the connector, we've successfully managed to restore the 4-pin connector and get this console to work once again. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you do have any comments or questions, leave them down in the comment section down below. If you want to see more repair videos where I repair mainly consoles but sometimes other things too, then be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications so that you're notified every time I upload. I also now have channel members, so if you like what I do here and you want to support the channel, you can of course support me for £1.99 per month. You can get higher tiers, but the most common is £1.99, and all channel members get early access to my videos. But that's going to be it for this one. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, see you later. Bye for now.